Hi there. My name is Phyllis Leverage. I'm assistant professor of art at South Texas College. And I'd like to thank you for joining us for this online exhibition of an artist talk from Louis Katz. The show is called Discontinuities. I would like to thank the people who worked hard to make this event possible. Freddie Gonzalez, Luis Corpus, Heaven Mendoza, Debbie Ellsworth, Simon Rodriguez, and Simon Rodriguez for allowing us to use this studio, and also the South Texas College administration. During the presentation, feel free to live comment, and we will address your questions at the end. So I would now like to introduce Louis Katz. Louis has an MFA from Montana State University and has been teaching for 26 years at Texas A&M University in Corpus Christi. He received a Fulbright grant to Thailand to document traditional pottery, and he is a fluent speaker of Thai. He returns frequently to Thailand to visit a village where they do wood firing pottery. He's also a frequent lecturer at NCCA, the annual ceramic conference, where he is well known for his flame-throwing pipe organ performance. So that must be very interesting. He considers himself to be a conceptual artist, and he's been referred to as a ceramic philosopher. So while some of his pottery is functional, he primarily considers pottery to be the subject matter rather than a product. Louise is interested in clay as an analog to nature, since clay has the ability to mimic and display the effects of natural processes. And he sees his work and his aesthetic related to the Japanese principle of wabi-sabi, which is a view that is centered on the acceptance of transience and imperfection. So Louise Katz, thank you very much for joining us today. We welcome the opportunity to hear your presentation and learn more about your work.
Great, thanks. I see my face there, so I must be on. I'd like to thank South Texas College and particularly Luis Corpus for inviting me here to do this talk and to have this online exhibition, which is certainly a new experience for all of us. Maybe the last, and we'll have online exhibitions forever, but I'm looking forward to seeing things live, face to face, hopefully soon. With that, I think I'm going to ask that it get switched over to my, there we go. Great, thanks. That's my slideshow. I'm new to this. I wanted to talk a little bit at the beginning about teaism, but first I've put together a URL that has links pertaining to this slideshow. So if you want to see more, you can just go to my website and after the last slash type in utrgv.html and you'll get your custom page just for UTRGV. And I wanted to talk about teaism. I saw the bowl that this man's holding when I was in high school in a book. It was a center leaf to a book, and I got to see and handle this. Those aren't my hands, but I got to see and handle this tea bowl at the Smithsonian about 15 years ago. And it really brought a lot of things together in my thinking about what it was I was doing and trying to do. It dated my exposure to Japanese aesthetics, even though I knew very little about it. I'm not Japanese. I see my work as derivative of a lot of Japanese ceramics in a lot of ways, but when you look at work related to that term, wabi-sabi, the acceptance of impermanence and imperfection, Uh, and you see it in the US, it really is, we have a different feel to it than they do in Japan. It's hard to think back now, almost 50 years. This is 49 years ago I saw this tea bowl, and think about what I was like and what living in 1972 was like. But for me, this picture really of me really puts things into perspective. This is what I looked like in high school. And yeah, there were hippies. Everybody was in some ways related in some way to a kind of back to nature and going back to the roots kind of feel. There was that everybody that I knew anyways was in somehow related to it. Sometimes relation is you're completely against it, but that still makes you related to things. And that picture keeps me thinking about what that was about. This is a pot that I made. It looks a lot like Bizen Pottery Village in Japan. I was just in Bizen a year and a half ago, and it was really amazing to be there. This is, in some ways, a clear knockoff of what they do in Japan, and I knew it at the time, but it was part of something bigger, which was an installation in a gallery of pots that were stacked up as they were fired in the kiln. The arrow here shows you where that pot was in the stack, and this is a picture of the whole installation. My father really didn't understand why half a pot could be brown and half a pot could be orange. He wanted pottery that was perfect, and I put that in quotes. The perfect pot, perfectly symmetrical, glazes that are perfectly symmetrical, really intricate patterns. That's what he wanted out of ceramics. And I thought that he was missing a lot of important issues in art and life and ceramics. I've always found it odd that we have people that mow their grass so that it is absolutely perfect, and then on the weekends they go off into nature to appreciate the wild. They seem like the antithesis of each other. So, anyways, when I did this, I thought of art as being, I was talking about art being educational, but you could also say that art is communication from the artist to the observer. But what are you communicating? You're communicating what you're educating them about, something about the artist, something that they're thinking, or something about the art. And so communication and education are in some ways synonymous in this regard. I have to remember that all you've seen of this pot is the pictures online, and maybe not even that, but this pot, it tells a story. You can, especially if you know something about clay, you can see how it was made. You can see why it looks the way it does. There's a lot of information there about what the process was for it to get to this. You can see the artifacts of a process. And in this case, the process, all the processes seem to mimic nature. And it at least looks like it's a wood-fired kiln, although wood-fired pot, although it's not. It's clearly a wood ash glaze. And there's a lot of details. The marks on the inside are shell marks, and they are from holding a pot up above the glaze so that you could fire one pot on top of another. And you can see the movement of the glaze as it flowed around on the bottom. And on the outside of the pots, you can see the scraping marks of a rib while it was being made. You can see the circular marks of it being spun on a wheel, and you can see the chunks of granite blebbing out of the clay as it's fired. And so there's all of these little stories that are going in, and they are at least analogous to natural processes that you see on rocks or trees or plants or just the clutter in your yard. Um, and so for me, these have a lot. There's a lot to see and understand about a pot that's like this. And it took me a long time to really understand that I needed to do this. I needed to be able to display a cracked pot. And what it really took was a pot that was nicely cracked. Just because it's cracked, I mean, it does tell a story, but it needs to enticingly tell a story. You need to really be able to sense that crack and what it means. And it can't look too much like an accident. It has to look any part. The Bauhaus used to say that any part of a design needs to be considered. I really think that every part of a design needs to look like it was considered. If it looks like I meant it to be cracked, then I have got the viewer. If it looks like I meant it to be random, even, then I've got the viewer. If it just looks like, well, it just happened, then it has no meaning. People have to believe that the artist had some sort of intent in order to read some sort of meaning out of it. And when things happen randomly, usually they don't carry that sense. So you have to look out for when does it really work. And to me, this pot, the crack in this pot really worked. And also that little bite out of the top here. But there's a lot going on here. You can see the drips. You can see the curved lines from it being thrown. You can see this bend. There's a lot of action, for me anyways, in this pot. And the surface has a lively texture. And I'm really looking for a lively texture. There's a quality to surface in pottery that's called breath. And it is difficult to get. And when you try and force it into a pot, it only looks like an imitation of breath. It has to look like it just happened, like the pot just happened. It's a sense that the pot is buoyed, that it's created by the volume it contains. And for me, it seems even harder to get in open forms like bowls. And so I think a lot about cracks and imperfections and when I can accept them and when I can't, because a lot of pots, they like fall over and fall apart. And this one cracked during the firing, and because it was a soda firing, it got glaze on it during the firing. And I looked and looked at this pot. Can I display it? Can I not display it? Should I do it? Should I not? And I decided that I could, and I took it to Japan. And somebody looked at it and they asked what I was thinking when I took a broken pot to Japan. And I felt like that made it a success. If they thought, what was I thinking about? Then they believed that I was thinking about something. If somebody believes all the parts of your design were done with a purpose, then you have them. They're going to start to look for meaning. Every part of a design should look as if it was intentional. Even if it's random nature, you intended it to have that. It should look like you intended it to have a randomness to it. So I wanted to just go back to nature. Old blue jeans became this thing. We didn't used to buy blue jeans that were faded. We faded them ourselves. We didn't put patches in them or holes in them. We wore them until they got holes. I find it very interesting that you can now buy jeans with holes in them and have been fake washed with rocks and have bleached holes. They all look contrived to me. And there's an acceptance of that contrived nature that I find interesting, but I don't find it appealing. I want the pots to not look contrived. I want them to look like they happened. I contrive them to look like they happened. And to me, that's a very difficult headspace to put myself in, a way to think about them. I need them to look like they just happened. I need to make them look like they just happened. It's not an easy thing. So I started with functional pots, and functional pots really became just a prop for me, just the not the content, but the subject matter. And it happened over a long time. I still make pots, but I make them so that I can think about them. And if pots are art, and I believe that just about everything is art, then why not other functional art, other functional objects like glaze tests? This is a blend between two glazes. This is a glaze. This is Chino over here. And this is this sort of satin purpley glaze over here. And in the middle is 50-50. If pots are art, then why aren't glaze tests art? And so at some point in graduate school, I started making glaze tests with the idea of displaying them. And so this is one glaze test over here, and here's another one. And this is the middle where it's 50-50 of one and 50-50 of the other. And so it's a progression from one glaze to another. Well, if glaze tests are art, what about bricks? I mean, a brick is the most humble utilitarian object. They don't cost very much money. And when I made this brick, they were 25 cents a piece. You could buy a brick for 25 cents. So if pots are art, then why not bricks? If pots are expressive, then why not bricks? And my definition of art at some point after this became any artifact of intelligence. I don't believe that we can remove expression from anything we do. I think the expression is there to be read. So for me, it's no longer a question. Yes, bricks are art. So is this slide talk. So is the piece of paper that I'm reading from. So is the computer screen. It all is expressive, and there is something there to be read, some form of expression, something about humanity. It all has it. And so this brick is kind of obvious. I made this out of the clay that came off the floor in the studio I was in. Well, bricks, why not kilns? What's a kiln? A kiln is a pot to fire pots in. They're this wonderful inbred object. You take a pot, you put it in another pot, you add fire. And so I started making kilns and putting them in art exhibitions. And this is one of the first ones that I made. And I unloaded the pots from it as the exhibition went on. People think that they know what they're doing when they make art. Some people are sure that they know everything about what they're doing, that it is all clear as day. And I don't believe that they're right. I don't think that you really get how your work relates to your past work, that you really understand it until you've got a fair bit of distance on it. But I started making kilns, and I knew I was making them to be art objects and displaying them in galleries. This is the kiln for Itawamba Community College. I call it Kiln for Itawamba. It had 1,107 bowls and about 500 pounds of charcoal and a blower on it, and 100 people around it watching 700 pots blow up. It was really a lot of fun. I wasn't expecting them to blow up. I had to just go with the show and watch them blow up. There wasn't much I could do about it. And everybody really enjoyed it. They thought I intended them to blow up. And once they thought that I intended them to blow up, I had them. You know, they thought, wow, why did he do that? Because it's so exciting to watch. You know, great. This is perhaps my most viewed kiln. It is on a scrap brick pile in Helena, Montana at the Archie Bray Foundation. And I built it, filled it with pots, and fired it. and it's been sitting up there ever since. And that's what the brickyard looked like when I built it. And on the right was where they made bricks, and on the left they made hollow tile. And the piles of scrap brick, broken brick in front of us are the reason that the brickyard closed. They built a big new kiln. They couldn't make it work good, and they went out of business and became the Archie Bray Foundation, a ceramic arts foundation. There's the kiln, a little bit more like how it is now. It's a little bit dilapidated. So over the years being an artist, especially in school, I got asked all the time, why clay? And I'd say, why paint? Why sculpture? Why this? Why that? It's a ridiculous question, but it was incessant, and it became an issue for me. So I decided that I was going to start irritating the painters, and I made a series of paintings that I called functional paintings. This is a painting, it's designed to sell bricks. I mean, in ceramics, we learn about functional ceramics and all different kinds of ceramics. Why don't painters learn about functional painting? There's signs, there's painting the outside of your house, to protect it. There's protective painting, there's oilcloth. How come they aren't learning about that? So I started to poke at them a little bit, and this one's designed to sell bricks, and this one's designed to sell pots, and it worked, and I wanted to make sure that my brick sign worked, and so I made a knockoff of that last one. I put it outside just to see if it would sell used bricks, and it worked really well. It was a really nice functional painting. It sold every single brick. It was very functional. So, just like my teapots can pour and they don't drip too bad, this painting sells bricks. It's functional. And I don't make many functionalist paintings, but that's what most painters do. They don't paint paintings for function. They paint them so that they're not functional. And so if I do this enough, I can just smile when somebody asks me why clay, why pots, why this, why that. I also made some other paintings and set them on fire. I finally decided that it was better if I used a more controlled source of fire than just lighting the whole painting on fire while the paint was wet. I let them dry, and I took a torch to it. You can see the scorch marks on it. This is a burner and a burner safety system, and it is a pretty well torched oil paint. As one would expect from a ceramic artist, I'm pretty attached to flames, but I'm also attached to music. And I have a rip-roaring case of ADHD that is always hard for me to get under control. And at some point, I decided that big projects were better for me than small projects. And I was asked to make a kiln for the Archie Bray Foundation's 50th anniversary celebration. And could I make it really exciting? And maybe 3 weeks later, somebody said, "Hey, Louis, do you want a pipe organ?" And one of the nice things about ADHD is that it is a really great condition for taking disparate ideas and bringing them together. And I believe that ADHD can be functional for generating new ideas. And I think that it's why it is so prevalent in the arts. And so I built a flame-throwing pipe organ, and here it is in Kansas City. And I will show you a little video of it in a little bit. But it brought fire and music and my friends at the conference all together, and it was really a lot of fun. This performance was 3 years of work, nights and weekends, to bring it off. I had to rebuild the pipe organ. You can kind of see it in the back. I had to make it all transportable, and I had to build this flame-throwing unit. So each note on the keyboard had a different gas jet. And let's see, okay. At the same time, you can tell that I got involved in all kinds of ideas, and it can be very difficult to take these verbal ideas and put them into work and make them readable. So I started making videos about my ideas, about my philosophical ideas of what is art, what is ceramics, what is function, what is expression. And I started putting them in videos, and this is a group of 3 videos that I installed. My viewpoint is one of a clayer. And so I made the headphones into these little 3-inch bowls that you hold up to your ears. Everybody that goes to the exhibition gets to hold up these things to their ears and have stereo ceramic headphones and watch the videos. Here's somebody, he doesn't understand that he's supposed to hold up both headphones, but he's listening to one side of it. And then I started to install them and project the videos onto plates. And this is for the Archie Bray Foundation's 60th anniversary celebration. And it is about how clay is not a material. Clay is a community. And I think that we tend to look at what we do in a very narrow, one-dimensional viewpoint. And I think that turning things 90 degrees and looking at them in some other way, conceptually 90 degrees, is very important and useful. And clay is a community, and it is a history, and it also is a material and a group of means of working and a lot of other things. I think that there's some philosophy that is more pronounced in clay than, say, in painting. And so this was a reasonable success. I learned a lot from making this video. It was not my best video. And I will bring you back to the videos later. I became much better at photographing things and using video as a medium. This is a video called Ours. And it's a video about how clay is the most important artistic material. And it really was because I got tired of being told about painting. People think that they are taking a history of art, and usually they're taking a history of painting. From the dawn of man to Jackson Pollock, it tends to be a very narrow view, and even when it's broadened from this narrow viewpoint. It's not a different viewpoint, it's broadened from this viewpoint. And so I'm kind of tired of hearing about it. Clay has got an incredibly rich history that almost nobody knows. Very little research is done about it, and certainly very little lecturing. And so I got better at my videography, and I gave a talk about how clay is so important. And then I projected video onto pots being thrown and re-recorded it. And it was a difficult thing to do, but I managed to bring it off. And I projected the video in 6 different edits onto 6 different fiberglass platters that were 6 feet in diameter, and you stood in the middle so that I could fill your head with my ideas. This was my brainwashing performance. And so it was really nice to see these things on big plates. Why clay is the most important ceramic material. I called it Why Clay, and it was a lot of fun. This is my wife's work. Her name is Gail Bush, and if you get a chance, you should go take a look at her work out on the web. She has a website. It's gailbush.com. Mine is lewiskatz.net. And the one for you guys, if you want, is lewiskatz.net/utrgv.html. And I'm hoping that this video sampler works and that it's not too choppy. But if you want to see it again, you can go right here, and it is linked to this. And so are all the individual videos that make up this sampler. I'm going to try and talk over the the video so you can get a sense of what's happening. I may pause it. This is the flame-throwing pipe organ. This is a 2001 Okay, this is my first video, and it was not very successful. I don't know if anybody watched it from the beginning to the end. Everybody always thinks that they're going to make something and it's going to be wonderful in the first try. And you have to understand that you're going to get better at something. It can be very hard when you're a young artist because your best work might be 5 years off, you know, or might be but I learned a lot about what I wanted out of video, and I got some layering of voices and layering of imagery, and then I made another one, and that's this is ARS, and I feel like I layered things better in it. I'm going to let it go for a little while. Does that seem okay?
So each of us, I guess we discussed this already, has our own edifice, our own collection of rocks. Logos. The edifice, they come in different shapes. Structures are reality.
They have similarities.
It's
And
different for each of us.
We would find some general similarities. Maybe between personality types.
We define
because
our
of
words
roles in
differently.
Society. Maybe because of our education. But that you can
When we
find
say something.
similarities. And so I made 2 tracks and I layered them over each other, sometimes more. And by the end of the video, it got very layered, and people learned through the video. At the beginning of the video, they could just barely handle the 2 tracks layered over each other. And as things progressed through the video, they got more and more able to look at multiple tracks. And at the end, it became what seems to be a mess, but I think that if you watch the whole video, you're better able to deal with it.
But I think there's just a little bit too much pedigree in this notion of artists. Submit them to scholarly journals. It doesn't take a bunch of pretty pictures of flowers.
It's just one good measure of it.
It doesn't take a bunch of lofty ideas. Give me a break.
When we look at the artifact,
Should we really be doing this?
We look right into men.
What it takes is
Women.
people to look at things.
When we look into artifacts, what we're seeing is a window,
Try.
a language
Find meaning
that
in them.
speaks from the mind
Give
of
me a break,
others.
man.
And so, you know, I said earlier that I have ADHD, and I've been working with clay for almost 50 years, and I am finding in the last 2 or 3 years that I'm making new work that is not very related to it. And not very related to it, and I'm okay with it. I think 50 years in clay is not a disaster. And so I've started using microcontrollers, 3D printers, and I had a blast over winter break working on some lamps. And this is one of the early ones. And it has 30 LEDs and a little microprocessor timer controlling them. It looks like the lights are moving, but in fact, it's just the timing of the LEDs that make it appear to be in motion. and I'm really enjoying doing them and working on them, and they are definitely something very new for me. So I thought I would show a few of these just so that we can get a sense. I want the wiring to be visible. I want the guts of the art to be able to be seen, and that is something that I think is going to come out in all of the new work. This one is about to go on display at the Art Museum of South Texas. It's not quite finished in this video. The red one doesn't look really great in ambient light, but this one works pretty well when the lights are on. And it's a little bit better than the red one. And the wiring is nice and visible and wired through these sort of thimbles or spools that look like a vertebra. And I managed to 3D print a wall mount bracket for it. So that's the end of my slide talk. And I'm going to return you to turn control of your television sets to Phyllis.
Well, thank you for the presentation. That was very interesting. I do have a couple of comments and questions I'd like to ask you. One thing I really liked that you said was that you see ceramics as being very akin to nature, and I've always kind of had that same understanding of ceramics. When I was in undergrad, I took one ceramics class, but I was taking it at the same time that I was taking a geology class. And my way of understanding, I understood geology as great big rocks that get broken down into smaller and smaller and smaller particles until they're clay. And I understood clay as being kind of like geology in reverse, because you were taking these little tiny particles and applying heat to them and kind of turning them back into rocks. So I don't know if I'm the only person in the world that sees it that way, but I really like that you are making so much reference to nature, and of course to those chance occurrences that happen in nature. And one question I had for you, you mentioned that you see everything in whatever you make needs to be purposeful, and I am trying so hard to get that very point across to my photography students right now. And so I appreciate hearing that again, but you do have elements of your work that, do appear random. And I was just wondering, do random things ever happen in your work that you don't mean for them to, but then you just go, oh, hey, I'm going to keep it?
So I have no problem. So the Bauhaus is a really important distinction. The Bauhaus said that every part of a design had to be considered. And I think that is a really great statement. I love it, but I think it's imperfect. I think that every part of a design has to look as if it was considered. If something happens to your work and it looks like you meant it to happen, it doesn't matter whether you meant it to happen or not. And if your work is about chance occurrences, and some people's work is, and it's apparent that it's about chance occurrence, then it does look intended. People talk about intent, and in artwork, I decided I needed a different word than that. And I talk about intendedness in this respect. I use that. Does it have this sense of intendedness? And if it does, it doesn't matter whether you had intent or not. If it has intendedness, you didn't have to intend it, The work has it. You don't have to have it. It's very different. Geology is, I see some comments about geology on the screen. it's an amazing class to take at the same time as ceramics, and I've had some really great geology students. Clay can be really precise. It is an amazingly expressive material. And anything that you can do with clay, well, you can do it with paint too. Paint is a natural material. And it is only sort of a joke with me that I say that painting is flat ceramics. I mean, look at Lascaux, at those caves and old caves in France. What did they do? They took a bunch of dirt that was a different color and they smeared it on a dirt wall. It's just ceramic. Rocks are ceramic. The earth pigments are ceramics. Painting is just flat ceramics. And for that matter, printmaking is flat mold making.
That's interesting. That you put it that way, because I've always thought that like clay was absolutely, of all the media, the one that is absolutely most directly related to nature, because it is earth. It's of the earth. Everything that's in it is a mineral that occurs in nature. And to my understanding, there's not a whole lot in any ceramic that is manufactured. If there is, I'm wrong, but I understand it as being just like all mineral based.
Yeah, well, it depends on what you mean by manufacture, because one of the things that I'm going to switch the topic maybe a little bit, but to me it relates. Painting is all about this picture plane, and I understand that paintings can be objects too. I tend to like them better when they have this sense of being an object. But we're talking about representation there. And when you take a piece of clay and you squeeze it, you put it somewhere, you aren't representing something, you're presenting something. And I don't see how in the art world representation should take precedence over presentation. Presentation is primary, and representation, the word re is after the fact, doing it again. But I'm a ceramic megalomaniac, and I would tell you that black and white photography is a ceramic process. We're talking about silver oxide, and from a chemist's point of view, metal oxides are ceramics. So, painting is just another ceramic process. The distinctions that are, any distinction that is made is artificial. There's no separation between blue and green. There's no distinct line between it. There is no distinct line between photography and ceramics in my mind, or between painting and ceramics, or between any two things. Fast and slow, you divide those two with an arbitrary decision. And I think that we limit ourselves with hierarchies. I think that hierarchies are artificial and generally destructive. They may be necessary, but they're generally destructive. When we think that something is better than something else, we lose something in that. When we think that two things are related, we gain something from it.
That's a really interesting way to look at it. Okay, I've just got two more questions, and then I see we've got a lot of questions from students, so I want to be able to get to that. But one thing that you mentioned is you talked about clay as a three-dimensional object, and we think of sculpture as three-dimensional objects where they sit there and do nothing. But then you found a way to reach over to the fourth dimension, by incorporating performative aspects and time-based video aspects. So what was the spark, that helped you kind of jump from that third dimension to that fourth dimension?
I don't know that it's a spark. I think that one of the things that happens when you have ADHD, you have a lot of ideas running around in your head, and disparate things come together. Firing kilns had a spark. I was in graduate school and I was talking about how when you turn a pot upside down, everything's got stuff in it. There's on the foot, there's usually marks. And if you're a ceramic artist, you understand the marks. You understand the marks that are on a pot. And when you're not a ceramic artist, you don't understand it. And nobody really seems to get that the excitement of unloading a kiln. It doesn't come into the gallery. And an artist named Boaz Vaadia said very clearly, why don't you put the kiln in the gallery? That wasn't my idea, that was his. And it was a really good idea. And I immediately started making kilns and rolling them into galleries. And so the spark, he listened to what I was saying. He provided that spark. I have no real problem with giving him credit for that. He was an incredible visiting artist. It was great to have him. And how did it grow? Boy, there are a lot of different things. I made an animation of a mathematical equation in high school. And I have always been somewhat fascinated by film, but old film was so expensive. And videotape was like digital photography. You can shoot as much of it as you want. It was cheap. And now you don't even need to buy the videotapes. It's gotten even better. So, that opened up a lot. Videotape opened up a lot. And so I don't know exactly where it all started. I think some of it was giving lectures in school. I used to give lectures for an art appreciation class, and they became better and better, and they turned into one of my early videos,
Very interesting. Yeah. Well, I always think it's interesting when you, find a way to bridge like one of the more traditional media with, something, performance or time-based and have them fused together. Like I really liked when you were projecting images onto the ceramics. I thought that was really neat. Okay. And I've got just one last question before I go on to the questions the students were asking. You said clay is a community. Could you just tell us a little bit more about what that means to you?
Well, when you're in school, you develop this community in school. And I'm sure that at UTRGV, at least when it wasn't online, was a community, that the art department was a community, that people got together as a community. And so college is also a community, and the art department at UTRGV, it's not just, if you think of it only as an educational institution, you're limiting what it is. It also is a group of friends, a group of people who go out to for beer or, whatever, get food together. And we were talking before this about NCECA, the annual ceramics conference, National Ceramics Conference. And it's not just a conference, it's 5 days of party. There is nothing better than to go to that conference. I miss it horribly, and I miss the people. And it is not just the makers, it is not just artists that are our community, and it's not just the artists or the students that are your community. There's also the staff, there's the janitors, there's the plumbers. Anybody that's involved in your department is part of UTRGV as a community. And in ceramics, it's buyers, it's historians, it's museums, it's curators, it's all of these people. And we are a cohesive bunch. And I spend as much time talking with clayers as anybody else. If you look at my Facebook page, there's a bunch of communities of people. There's the university community. There is my community from high school. Then there is more than half of which are people that work in clay. And then another large community is Thai artists. that I am part of, or people involved in Thailand. There are very few of us that aren't Thai that I see as being part of this community. There's also ham radio operators that see themselves as a community. And so I'm a part of it.
Yeah. I've always thought of ceramicists as being very communal people because, like, say, when I was in graduate school, all the ceramicists were great about getting together. And one of the things I loved about their parties was everybody brought food on in a ceramic dish that they made themselves. And I always thought that they were kind of like the most grouped together, happy to be with one another, micro communities and, in institutions I've been in before. So, but okay, well, listen, we've got quite a few questions here. Let's see. We've got some comments as well. Fascinated by this new technology I'm learning, shell marks, breath, bleeps, I think, love it. One question is, so is American wabi-sabi intentionally unintentional?
Ooh, probably a lot of it. I see American wabi-sabi as being wabi-sabi kind of on steroids. We tend to overdo it. But so do some Japanese. There's some modern teaware is just over the top. And the old tea, the stuff that I like the best is really the earliest, and it is so subtle. It catches me every time. It draws me in, and it looks so like it just happened. Every part of this object looks like it just happened, and they are so painstakingly done to look that way. It's kind of an amazing thing. There is a talk that I gave just on the term breath at NCECA about 3 years ago, and if somebody emails me, I can find a link to it and send it to them. But the term breath is a forms that breathe. It's a kind of form, it's a structured form that is different than the traditional Western structured form. And in my talk, I talk about figurative form with breath rather than figurative form with muscles. Bones, muscles, and skin is the Western structure of a figure. In the East, it is skin and volume, and you see it in mostly Buddha images, but you also see it in more modern images.
And then I have a comment about, I think it might be in response to the previous question, that many people consider ceramics as a craft. And of course, we've been talking for years about, trying to bring things like ceramics, glass, small metals out of the, craft definition and into the high art definition.
No, I'm looking forward to the day when painters start to act like they're artists and not craftsmen. The craft of, I'm tired of the craft of painting. I want to see some art. I think that it is entirely arbitrary, but it is also classist to make this separation. In the Renaissance, there were two words, art and craft, and their roots. What did art mean? Art meant skill and to assemble. What did craft mean? Skill and to assemble. Who owned the word art? The Anglo-Saxons. Who owned the word craft? The Slavs. Who had money? The Anglo-Saxons. They had exactly the same meanings. But the people with money were the people that used the word art. When the Medicis decided to separate out painting, sculpture, and architecture as the arts. They are the people that imposed this artificial distinction on us. They eliminated the restrictions of the guild system from these crafts. And they started to give them more money and to promote them. They made this distinction happen. And they are the reason that things like quilt making, sewing, needlepoint, lead work are not seen as arts.
That it's just something that stuck through all those years.
Katz's equation is that art equals craft plus money. I use a dollar sign. Craft plus a dollar sign equals art.
And I've also understood the distinction being between like functional and non-functional. And that's just another understanding I have of the distinction, between the two.
Well, I would say functional and functionless. If painting isn't functional, why do we do it? If it's functionless, don't do it. What's the function? Oh, painting had the function to communicate ideas about the church. Great. Painting had the idea that it could communicate about light and nature. Great. It had a function.
Yeah.
But if it's functionless, let's not do it. Let's just not do it. The most minimal thing I can think of, my best example, I don't have one sitting here, is a handle on a cup. This doesn't have a handle. Where do you put the handle? Is it high? Is it low? How big should it be? How little should it be? What should the attachment look like? This is a formal and really minimal pursuit. Making a good functional cup is formal. It is a really hard thing to do. And if it isn't art, I don't know what is.
I agree with that. I totally agree with that. I have a question that this is a pretty broad question, and you've kind of addressed it. But anything more you want to add about what inspired you to do the work you do?
Inspiration. Yeah. The first thing that comes to my mind is my 92-year-old mother, who was supportive. This is a really hard question. When I was 4 years old, I turned a tricycle upside down in my driveway, and I started to turn the wheel around, spin the wheel, and my brother asked me what I was doing, and I said I was making nothings. And as far as I'm concerned, that was my first conceptual piece of art that I can remember, right? And I don't think I've changed, but when people talk about inspirations, I try very hard to not throw ideas away. Ideas build on ideas. And if you forget the ideas, it is wasted opportunity. Every piece of work that a student makes should have a snapshot taken of it so that they can remember it. Good, bad, indifferent, immature, mature, it really doesn't matter. You should have these images so that you can remember them, because you can't put yourself together and figure out what this stuff was about without knowing what it was. And people that say you should keep a journal, I believe them. I'm dysgraphic. I don't write well. But even with that, I have a journal. If you get to my website and you look at my wiki, you'll see, 100 pages of ideas. And I've stored them most recently in other places. I'm storing them in Google Drive. I've got a blog. I've got a folder full of ideas. And I have a sketchbook that I hardly use anymore. I put them online.
Yeah, interesting. Journaling is, and just getting your ideas down, whether it's a sketch, a written form, handwritten, typed into a computer, whatever, it helps so much with the generation of ideas. So
give me a second more topic, okay? Ideas. If you're having troubles getting ideas about what to do, you can't get a good idea, do something. The only way to get to work is to get to work. And if you don't have a good idea, make something anyways, take a snapshot of it and throw it away if it's bad.
Yeah,
But
give yourself permission to make something bad. I tell my students that all the time. Make something bad, throw it away.
Yeah, that's my wife's line. When you want to get to, you need to get to work and you don't know what to do something. And I think it really works.
So my next question, in the video, does your facial hair connect to what you said earlier about back to nature?
So to me, this is my artificial look. I am clean. I shaved my head earlier this year. I shaved it all, but this is so that I can wear a mask and have it fit, so that I can teach my students. I am not that attached to my beard, but my natural tendency would be to just let it grow, because it's another one of those things you have to do every day. The amount of time you put into mowing your lawn it's absurd. And the amount of time you put into shaving, I don't want to do it.
I saw that comment in your bio. You like beards unshaven and lawns unmowed. Okay. I've got another question about what inspired you. I think you've kind of spoken on that. Lots of comments that it's fascinating and great stuff and looks amazing and beautiful. Here's a comment about, that you had an interesting development from ceramics to 3D printing.
Okay, so I started out in college as an engineering student. I don't really believe in this right brain, left brain divide. I think that the division between people that can do math and people that can't do math, and people that are good with engineering and people that are bad with engineering, is something that happens to us in school, and it's unfortunate. So I teach my students, I'm teaching a course right now in these little microcontrollers. It's a little computer, and that's a distance sensor on it. There's the computer. I teach them how to use them to control light, motion, sound, and also have with sensors or timing or whatever. And nobody is incapable of learning it. And I think that most of what I have to overcome in my students is fear, not ability. I think they all have the ability to learn it. Once they believe they can learn it, they've got it. I think it's artificial. And I think that engineers are just a particular kind of artist. Einstein sure thought that what he did was art. He understood the lack of separation between what he was doing in philosophy and art and expression. My entire family, I see the question about Thailand. I'm remembering it. It's a good one. My family has people that operate in both ways. My father was a biologist and pharmacist, and he built harpsichords as a hobby. He's a musician. My brother Ralph is a computer programmer and sort of like support specialist for a living, but he plays klezmer clarinet. I'm going to answer that question that just popped on the screen about Thailand. There's a Japanese word called minge. And if you've learned about the effect of the Protestant Reformation on painting, or you've learned about the Impressionists, how come you haven't learned about the minge movement in Japan? How come that was left out of your art history courses? Because it's not art history. It's a specific subset of art history that we learn. Minge means folk craft. And it relates to William Morris in Europe, but it's the Japanese sort of way of it. And it is an appreciation of the old crafts in Japan, and they relate to nature. But now they are not made by like humble peasant potters anymore. They're made by people that have Mingei pots are made by people that have college educations like me. And so in Thailand, they were still making functional pots in the old method with wood firing. And it was still extant. I mean, pottery pots, handmade pots by individual people for function were still a part of society. And I got to go there. Travel. Why Thailand? I'm seeing Chris Leonard's thing on the screen there. What about inspiration of the anthropology, culture, and travel with Thailand to Japan, etc.? I'm sure that there are a lot of people at UTRGV that speak both Spanish and English, and notice that as they move from one culture to another, it is like they become a different person. I've become a fluent Thai speaker, and I am fascinated by the cultural differences that happen when I'm speaking Thai and English. And I have Thai friends, and sometimes we speak English together, and sometimes we speak Thai together, and how we talk and what we talk about, and sort of like the cultural construct around that changes as we switch languages. And I really think that we have this little, narrow, almost binocular vision of the world that is constrained by our culture. And getting into another culture allows you to see what you're seeing from 90 degrees off. You can get it in some perspective. And I love that about Thailand. It is so different than here. And Japan is very different from here, too. But I've gotten involved in Thailand, Thai culture more than Japanese culture.
It's really interesting. I'm glad we're getting all these questions. About we've touched on anthropology, we've touched on language, we've touched on science, and I think this is one of the things that those of us who teach art appreciation are always trying to convey to our students is art is not just like this singular thing unto itself, just like you mentioned, the art media are not singular and categorized, but that art can be used as a way to understand, really just about any topic. You mentioned engineering, you mentioned Einstein, and I think it's great that your work and your philosophy and your words are, showing us just how much it's not even overlap. It's more like intertwine, with pretty much everything. And I wish the rest of the world, who might not be so informed about art, had a better perception of it that's more in line with what you've been saying.
So I wanted to talk about some cultural differences, and I'm definitely not in the US. We really do try to, in some ways, and succeed at removing some class distinctions. And so I've gotten some questions here as I was talking about this. Something popped up on the screen from someone. It was a comment, and it did not start with the phrase Professor Lewis. And in Thailand, a student, and it'd be forever to get comfortable with this. I hated it. Oh, Professor Lewis Cop, Professor Lewis Cop. The subservience was something that it grates with my natural sense, having grown up in Michigan. And it's a different culture than it is down here. Even down here, everybody wants to call me sir or professor or something, doctor. And in Michigan, that wouldn't happen. In the ceramics, it really doesn't happen. And it's because they're from different cultures. There are other things about Thailand that I find that never did grate on me. They take care of people that are in trouble a lot better than we do here. It's interesting.
I just found another really interesting question. I'd love to hear your take on. I don't really think it's a question to you. I think it's more of a rhetorical question, but I'd like to hear your comments anyway. Why pay so much money for a mug that was made by an artist when you can pay $1 for a mug that was, mass produced somewhere and you can pick it up in the dollar store?
So I actually think that we are not suffering from a shortage of art in the world. We're suffering from a shortage of appreciation. I have what seems to many to be a tongue-in-cheek video that is a 20-minute critique of styrofoam cups. But it's my belief that if we looked at styrofoam cups with an appropriate eye, they would become better objects. Cost is really an artificial construct. Now, it does take more time to make this than it does to do anything, but if you remove all appreciation from everything that we do, I'm going to not answer this question. I can see it coming. But if you remove for all appreciation, all expression from everything, you get what I talk about is the gray world, and it really is part of my next video. You get up in the morning, you put on your gray clothes, you brush your teeth with your gray toothpaste and toothbrush. Yeah. You eat your gray food, you drink your gray water, you get in your gray transport, and you go to your gray work, and you move gray widgets from one pile to another. All day long, no thoughts, nothing. Yeah. When you get off work, there's no reason to go to a bar because it's just going to be gray beer and you're going to have a gray conversation. Without expression, there is no value to life. And part of expression is the interpretation of it. Everything, it is everything. It's one of these things that is all-encompassing. People say everything is chemistry. They're right. Everything is physics. They're right. Everything is God. They're right. Everything is this. Everything is that. Sure. Everything is expression. And I've been drinking out of this cup since 1998. It's by Mackenzie Smith, but I glazed it. He came and was a visiting artist. I glazed it, and I got water in it right now. And when I touch this, it is almost like we're shaking hands. When you go to the grocery, it used to be we would go to the grocery store and we would see the same cashier each week, and we developed a relationship with them. You know them. You had an interaction with this person. They became an important part of your life. Mm-hmm. People think that the real loss in grocery stores and those automatic cashiers, where you check yourself out, is the loss of a job. And I'm not here to diss that, but I think the loss of connection is a more important issue. Mm-hmm. And I miss having a relationship with the person. I love talking with the people in the grocery store. I wish I could meet the guy in the old bagel factory again.
Yeah. It's a big loss. It's a big loss, and I think COVID has made us even more aware of that kind of thing. But it's been happening for a while. We do self-checkout now. It's like I don't want to have to wait in line to talk to a cashier. That takes too much of my time. I just want to check my stuff out, or it's even faster to just get it off of Amazon. And I think you make a good point. This is something that's dying very quickly in our society, and I think it's something change happens, but it's something to consider as a loss. Okay, we're getting lots of questions. I don't know if I'll have time for all of them, but let's see here. Lots of comments about the use of a handmade cup versus someone commented that they truly enjoyed the connection that you made between clay and paint, and how both mediums weren't disconnected.
Everything is connected. We're all interconnected, you know. There are no disconnections. I don't believe in them. And part of that is Eastern philosophy. That words, separations are all artificial. They're necessary. We can't talk without them. You can't distinguish a fast speed from a slow speed without an artificial distinction. You can't, there is no separation. If you look at the color wheel, you try to find, the only way to have a line between blue and green is to draw it.
Yeah,
you know,
true.
Artificial. And we think that we are seeing the whole world, and our eyes are truly flawed at our ability to see color. We think that when you mix yellow and red together, you get orange, but there are all these individual spectra that we don't really see. We see them mixed together as orange, but in fact, they're just, when we think we're seeing orange, we are often seeing yellow light and red light together, and we can't distinguish it from truly orange light. We are not seeing the world as it is. We are seeing them with these flawed instruments. We're smelling it with this flawed instrument. We're feeling it with these flawed instruments. We don't have a grasp on reality that's real. And we make up words based on these flawed instruments, and they are not reality. Does that make sense? It's a hard concept.
Yeah, and you know, it just brings a lot of attention to the distinct, you know, differences in Western thinking and, you know, Eastern, Eastern philosophies. You know, and in the West, you know, we definitely like our little compartments. We like to break things apart so that we can understand them. And so that's an interesting thought.
I got one on the screen from Chris Leonard.
What does Chris want?
To make a sizzly pot, a sizzly pink funky. So I made my first pot that I can think of when I was in elementary school. I threw it on the wheel. It was a plate. I thought it was beautiful, right? And they made me ruin it by turning it over and trimming the backside. I walked into high school, and Chuck Domstein, the social studies teacher, handed me my schedule. And I said, I can't take this math class. I got to change this math class. And he said, we can't change your math class. I said, no, I can't take this math class. He said, we can't change it. I said, I can't take math with this woman. He said, I already knew I had him. He said, well, we can't change it because you don't like the teacher. I said, well, we're going to have to change it. And he said, I told you we can't change it. I said, she's my mother. He said, come here, let's change that class. And I ended up in something called ceramics. It was the only thing left with seats. And I'm not sure that I even knew that it was clay. And I got sucked in. I have no idea how long it took me to make something that was good. Good is an artificial construct, because I really liked that pot that I made in 4th grade, and it enriched my life. And yes, it was expressive, and there were things to see it in it and things to do. That first thing that you make, if you think it's bad, I think you are not looking at it with the right frame of mind. So good to me is an artificial construct that has little meaning anymore. But enticing, it depends enticing to who.
We have a comment. Oh, sorry, what's that?
I almost got kicked out of graduate school for expressing an opinion like that.
We have a comment that they like the intimacy and the thought that you put into your your work. And, I think that's one of the reasons it's so interesting to hear an artist talk about their philosophy, and then go back and look at their work again and, recall what they told you, and then see how, oh yeah, that does really come, that does really come through the work.
Gabby, thank you very much. I certainly was not this way in 1972 when I took my first ceramics class. I'd say I was a thinker, but I had no idea. I was given assignments and I did them. And I rebelled against a lot of things. I was not an ideal student, but I continually learned things. To be somebody that really likes learning is a real gift. And if you find that you don't like learning, then you're busy learning the wrong things. You should find the things that you love to learn and then learn as many of them as you can.
This one might be difficult to answer, but we'll give it a try. What does clay mean to you?
Clay is an amazing material. It is gooey, it's plastic, it's a liquid, it can do so much. But it is just a material like anything else. I am trying to convince art students that how they write a computer program is art and that it's expressive, and how the program functions, that it is expressive. And so, as much as clay is special to me, and I have this great, God, it is such a great medium. It is so broad and there's so much in it. There's science, there's skill. Not that science isn't skill. There's all of this stuff. There's so many ways to work it. It is so broad. You'll never learn it all. It's just another material. And so what does it mean? I don't know. It's such an early material. You think about the Venus of Willendorf or other things that are made with mud, just or carved out of stone. I tend to see myself, I call myself a clayer, but I tend to see my medium as being more ceramics. And I look at ceramics in the broadest sense that I can, so that I can include the earth pigments in paint. And so when I look at cement, I really could end up making things out of cement and see them fitting this little narrow genre of ceramics really easily. They are. All of those streets, you're driving on my material, and rocks, that's my material. So what does it mean to me? I don't know by itself what it means to me. It's a good question.
Very good question. Well, we're probably reaching about the time we need to wrap up. So again, I would really like to thank Louis Katz for sharing your work with us today and all your fascinating insight into your work. Thanks to everyone who has joined us and contributed to the conversation with your excellent comments and questions. And please, everybody, take the time to go through and look at the online exhibition. There's some beautiful work in there, and now you can look at it with fresh eyes and have a little bit more of a cerebral experience with it. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.